Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Eric Morehead here. I'm going to be leading you through our webinar today, data analytics and compliance programs. We're going to take a look at the DOJ guidance and have some practical insights. As I said, my name is Eric Morehead. I am a with the advisory services team at LRN. I have been with LRN for a few years, but have been working on compliance programs with organizations for about 20 years now. So I'm familiar with the Department of Justice and their recommendations and guidance over the years, and we're going to talk a little bit about that history first. I think that's an important context for us to have. We have seen this often called the DOJ memo or the compliance memo, discussed quite frequently over the past few years. The first iteration came out in 2017, and we've seen several amendments since then. I want to talk a little bit about that history just because I know that many of you are experienced hands in compliance and are familiar with it, just as you're familiar with the sentencing guidelines. But when we're discussing expectations and best practices for compliance with our stakeholders in turn in our organizations, sometimes context for why this guidance is important, it can be helpful. So I think spending just a little bit of time talking about what the guidance is and what it isn't can be helpful. Then I'm going to talk about the updates that just occurred in September of 24, which included a renewed focus on data analytics and compliance programs. And we're going to look at a little bit of peer data. Throughout the discussion today, I'll be mentioning data from one of our particular data sets, the Program Maturity Assessment Model, the PMA data set. We're actually going to even provide a couple of questions from the PMA questionnaire for the participants today to participate in throughout the discussion. I think that that's helpful. Benchmarking is obviously some important data that you can use in implementing and improving your program. I want to spend also a little bit of time talking about another aspect of the DOJ update to the memoranda around proportionality. That really dovetails with the use of data in compliance programs because you can't get to effective use of data. You can't get data tools. You can't get the manpower necessary to utilize and figure out what the next steps are when you analyze that data, unless you have budget. And there's a proportionality principle that was introduced in the September memo that I think is really important that we need to spend a little bit of time talking about because it really does dovetail with data analytics use. And then lastly, spend a little bit of time talking about some practical steps, some initiatives that trends that we see where organizations are undertaking to include analytics in their and data use in their compliance programs, and practical things that all organizations can consider moving forward. And then if we have time at the end, which we may or may not, we'll do some Q&A. However, I would encourage you to use the chat function in the application here. I believe it's going to be along the top menu bar here. If you have questions as we go along, I think it's much more effective for us to have those questions and that discussion in context. So as I'm going through the next hour presentation, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box. I have it open on my screen here. So I'm going to try to keep track of any questions that are asked and answer those in context. So don't wait until the end. We may not have time. So if you have a burning question as we're going along, please feel free to enter it, and I'll try to address those questions as I can. So with that, let's jump right in and talk about the guidance from the Department of Justice. I think the first thing to keep in mind is that this guidance is not to you. It's not to organizations or the general public. It is guidance for prosecutors. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're considering sort of the why and the practical application of the guidance in the memoranda. It is directed to those trial attorneys in main justice. It actually comes out of fraud section in Main Justice, um, uh, they're they're providing context to these line prosecutors who are evaluating cases to determine whether uh, the uh, uh, the organization that they're investigating or the case that they're looking into, the organizations involved have an effective program. Uh, that also goes out to all of the U.S. attorneys, assistant U.S. attorneys, and U.S. attorneys offices across the nation. So it applies to all of those prosecutors throughout the Department of Justice, but it's not directed towards us. What it asks those evaluating a program to do is to determine whether the individual compliance program is risk-based and is effective. And how they do that is there are a couple of threshold questions that are key questions that are asked or that the prosecutor should be asking as they're evaluating the program. Is the program well designed? Have you conducted a risk assessment? Has the organization conducted a risk assessment? Have they appropriately addressed the risks that that particular organization faces? Um, it is not abnormal or wasn't abnormal, certainly a few years ago, 5 to 10 years ago, to take a look at a compliance program, even with a really large integrated organization, and see that they were spending almost all of their uh, uh, compliance budget on anti-corruption, on anti-bribery enforcement, because perhaps they had had an issue with that. And so they were hyper-focused on one issue in one area. That may have made sense, but it may not. So the kind of threshold question here is, how is the organization determining that where they're spending their money, where they're putting their focus, what they're training on? Those questions are important. And there has to be some methodology, some way that you have come to the conclusion that the spend and the focus of your program is appropriate. And that is often a compliance risk assessment or some sort of evaluation, something that probably includes some benchmarking at the beginning of any kind of adoption or change to your program. So how is it designed? How did you come to the conclusion to design it that way? Is it being applied earnestly and in good faith? Or another terminology that's used in the memo, is it adequately resourced and empowered? So these are two things: budget and manpower, resources. Do you have the adequate resources to address the compliance risks that your organization faces? And secondly, the department has been using terms like empowered and stature with regards to compliance for a few years now. So not only in this memoranda, but in speeches from assistant attorney generals and other Department of Justice officials have reinforced this idea that they expect to see compliance as a member of the leadership team and having some influence on the organization overall, not a function that is cabined off to the side. So resources, but also how is compliance empowered to do the job? And then lastly, and this dovetails directly to our main thrust for today, does it work? How are you measuring the effectiveness of your program? So that really hits on some of the major changes we saw in this most recent amendment in September of 24. Uh, so measuring means, uh, you know, what data are you gathering? How are you analyzing that data? How is that data um, informing your decision making moving forward? Is your program dynamic? Are you gathering data, analyzing risk, analyzing your controls, and then making determinations about changes that are necessary? Compliance is a moving target. That's uh, a phrase along with tone from the top and tone from the middle that is on the lips of a lot of compliance officers for many years. It's a moving target. It's constantly changing. Your organizations are constantly changing. A lot in a lot of industries where there's still a lot of acquisitive behavior going on, and companies are changing. The markets that they play in are changing. The focus is changing. The products and services are changing. If all of that is changing, compliance needs to be changing too. So there's an expectation that programs be dynamic. And how do you address that? You have to have data. You have to know where those changes are occurring, where those new risks are, and how and what's the best way to address those risks. As I mentioned, this is focused primarily, the memo is directed at prosecutors. Their need to assess those three main questions. But a bigger part of that now, post September 2024, is what kind of data are organizations gathering in their compliance program? How are they utilizing that data? How is that data effectuating change in the program? Um, the memo itself, we have a little QR code here for those of you. I assume some of you may not have actually taken a look at the memo. I encourage you to do it. It's not a hard read. It's not particularly long. It's a lot of bullet points, and it's pretty self-explanatory. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, I encourage you to do so. Specifically, it addresses and talks about using technology. Uh, uh, there's an expectation, and we'll talk more again about proportionality in just a few minutes. There's an expectation that the technology you're using in compliance is going to be similar to the type of technology that you're employing for the other operational aspects of your program. If you're using AI and machine learning to help improve your processes for manufacturing, sales and marketing, and all of the other aspects of your enterprise, there's going to be an expectation you're doing the same, that you're adapting that technology to the extent it makes sense, and you can utilize it effectively in compliance as well. Um, the proportionality piece, which I mentioned already a couple of times, there's going to be a look, if there's ever an examination of your program effectiveness, at what your investments were, and how the investments in compliance compared to investments across the organization. Leveraging data and resources that already exist. I think this is an important one, and it's reinforced in the memo. Um, One of the key things that's in the that kind of over is overarching over all of the guidance that we see it from DOJ and other regulators, is they don't expect a one size fits all approach to compliance. Uh, and you don't necessarily have to go out there and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on the most whiz-bang new AI tool if if you can kind of turn over some rocks internally and gather some data that you just currently aren't utilizing. That can be as effective as anything else. So it's important to see some progress there around leveraging existing data and resources that are available inside the organization. Um, I call this the grain of salt with regards to the DOJ memo. And I think this is important too for everybody to understand when we're talking about guidance from the Department of Justice. As I said, the DNA of this memoranda goes back to the fraud section of the Department of Justice. A lot of, at least the initial memoranda, and still to this day, uh, really focuses on the cases that the fraud section was most familiar with, which were FCPA or anti-corruption cases. And so there's a lot of talk about third-party due diligence, which, makes sense for organizations, even outside the anti-corruption context. So I don't want to poo-poo that completely, but just understand that that is the focus of the memoranda, at least initially. It's also important because we are in a new environment with a new Department of Justice, or relatively new Department of Justice, that whenever there are transitions, there are changes. We've already seen that. I just mentioned FCPA. Many of you are well aware that the focus around FCPA has dramatically shifted in the last 6 months. Um, it is worth noting that under the prior Trump Department of Justice, the then Deputy Attorney General really wanted to make a focus of removing these memoranda, not just this particular memoranda, but a lot of these. There are several of these memoranda that are out there directed at prosecutors, and have everything in the U.S. Attorney's Manual. That endeavor did not proceed very far, but it could always change. The thing that you have to understand about this, again, it's guidance to prosecutors. It's not a official rulemaking. It's not uh, uh, it's not something that can't change, be modified, or disappear today. We could go to the website, the Department of Justice, and the memo could just be gone. Uh, I don't think that's likely, but it is something to consider when you're forming your opinion. That's why I think it's important, and we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to give you some benchmarking data. It's important to focus not just on, the strictures within this memoranda only, but also consider best practices generally when you're talking about data usage or anything else with regards to your compliance program. So here's our first question. This again comes from uh, our program maturity assessment tool. And if you want to, participants, if you can go ahead and choose all that apply here. Question is, over the next 12 months, my company will be, and then we have some initiatives that could involve gathering data. So curious as to what our participants today are considering to do, considering over the next 12 months to do. Implementing culture survey, doing a risk assessment, updating your compliance training tools and resources. Those training tools might then be gathering more data, benchmarking the program, or you don't have any significant initiatives planned. So let's give you another few seconds here and let's see what our results are. All right. Oh, this is good. So we've got a majority of organizations that are going to be doing some sort of risk assessment or program review, and also updating training tools and resources. This is really consistent with the data we'll see in just a second from other participants that are in this data set. Uh, Benchmarking the program a little bit less. I know that oftentimes the compliance risk review or program review won't include benchmarking. Sometimes it will. Um, and really pleased to see that there's only 12% of our participants today that are not planning to do anything. I assume that's not because you don't want to. It's perhaps because you don't have the budget and the resources to do so. And maybe after today, you'll have a little bit more ammunition to use to help you make the case for that. Um, so getting a little more specific about what the expectations listed in the memo talk about with regards to data. The idea, the department is suggesting that they feel using data and analyzing that data will help organizations be more proactive in identifying issues. So that's like real-time monitoring. That it will help improve effectiveness of your tools and resources and processes. I think that's, something, organizations have been using compliance data to do for many years already. And then also help you plan for the future, allocate those resources and make those improvements. So all pretty fundamental and straightforward things. Um, let's do another question here along the same lines. This one specifically about your policies and procedures. Oftentimes we ask questions about training, but I like to ask questions about what data you're gathering around your policies and your code, your written standards, because that I think sometimes there's been evolution around using data to evaluate training, and we'll see that in some of the pure data here in a few minutes. But I feel like this is an area where companies don't really spend too much time. And, how do we measure effectiveness of our of our code? How do we measure effectiveness of our standalone policies? And there are some ways to do that. Tracking utilization, tracking any kind of acknowledgement or review online. But I know a lot of organizations, this is an area that just doesn't get covered quite as much as, say, training effectiveness evaluation. Let's see what our results are here. Oh, this is good. So we have a slight majority that are doing employee uh, compliance assessment, either surveys or quizzes, to make sure that the important information that's in your code and your policies is being digested. So that's gratifying to see. A little bit less, 34% and 29% are tracking either communication and implementation around those policies and procedures, or actually tracking the review on some sort of intranet based or web-based implementation of the code or the standalone policies. And about 22%, that's, not bad. I might have expected it to be a little bit higher, aren't really doing anything with regards to effectiveness for their written standards. So that's one, even before we get to the fourth topic today, that's one thing to consider moving forward for that 22% of the participants that aren't doing anything right now is think a little bit about how you might measure the effectiveness and use data to measure the effectiveness of code and policy use in your organization. A little bit of data from that data set that you just participated in. What we're finding when we look at when we query organizations about their data use is still a minority of organizations are using data analytics to monitor compliance on an ongoing basis. Again, not surprising, still standing this up. Compliance has budgetary constraints that a lot of other parts of the organization sometimes don't. And so we may lag behind utilization of some of these tools. But just, we still are under 40% of surveyed organizations that are using data analytics in their program. Just 26% have integrated using data analytics into their program assessments. So using benchmarking or other data analytics or data gathering in doing your program evaluation. I think that's primarily going to be benchmarking. So only, a little bit over a quarter of organizations. And that's kind of, I'm gratified to see, I think it was like 30 plus percent of the participants today are suggesting they're using benchmarking. So we have a best practices group here. So that's good to see. The survey results also show that 28% of organizations investigate reports through local managers, while 38% use compliance personnel, and 24 have a red flag policy. I'm going to talk more about this because I think sometimes we overlook, going back to one of the earlier slides where I was talking about turning over rocks, we sometimes overlook the data that we already have been using and how we can better utilize it. One of the things that I find over and over again in organizations is when you're talking about incident reporting or any kind of query system where employees can ask questions or report concerns, whether that's that includes that anonymous reporting mechanism that the sentencing guidelines told us we needed to have 20 years ago, and we now have, but it's broader than that. I find that there's a real issue with organizations not getting aggregate data across the enterprise on on employees reporting concerns. Because here's what we know about employees reporting concerns. Survey data going back well over a decade, when you ask employees their preference for reporting misconduct or concerns or questions, the hotline helpline always scores in the single digits as the preferred method. the overwhelming method by which people prefer to report is to their manager. Now, obviously, sometimes their manager is the problem, so they need alternatives. But it's to managers, to HR, and a real data opportunity for most organizations is to get that aggregate data from the management funnel and get that data from HR. I think many organizations have matured their relationship with HR, and there's trend data and trend data are much more likely to be shared now than they were, say, 10 years ago, where it was very siloed. But there's still opportunities there to gather reporting data from other functions like legal and HR. But the real opportunity is where's the reporting data that's being reported to the local managers or the regional managers going? If you don't have, if it's not coming to HR, if it's not coming to compliance, if it's not coming to legal. So I think that, uh, that is a not necessarily an easy lift, but it's something that's already there. You don't have to create a tool for it necessarily, but you have to create a process to make sure that you're properly gathering and aggregating that data. That's a real opportunity. And that's an opportunity that a lot of organizations still miss. Over one third still track misconduct in investigations on a spreadsheet. Uh, you know, uh, Many of these hotline and helpline services provide a database, a tool with the service itself, and some organizations really utilize that and find that to be really helpful. Some don't really use those functions, and the tools vary. Some of them are good and some of them are not so good. But that's another opportunity, like getting aggregate data on reporting. This is an area, again, reporting, asking questions, reporting concerns. Um, uh, it's very fundamental stuff. And if the only data that you are getting and that you are reporting up the chain of command to the audit committee, to the board of directors, is hotline calls, you're missing stuff. I can promise you, you're missing stuff. You're missing trends, and you're missing aggregate data. So finding a way to create the process and the ability to collect that data. You may already have the tool that helps you aggregate that data if you have a hotline or helpline service. You may not. You may need to go out and find something or create something or do or take another method. But that is a real opportunity. 63% of organizations in our survey have plans to update compliance training tools. So we asked about training updates, and I don't think we were quite to 63%, but we were consistent with that. We're seeing, I think it was 61% actually. So we're real close in our group today to the overall data set. We see that a lot. I mean, obviously, we're in the training business at LRN, so we hear from organizations all the time looking to improve their training, but also gather more data about training. Um, Sort of like just reporting a hotline, helpline incidents is not giving you the full picture of misconduct and concerns in the organization. Just reporting training completion rates, which was the metric for training for years, is probably not adequate anymore. So you have to be able to glean more data from your training process to show effectiveness, to be able to determine whether you're on the right track with your training and uh, whether there are potential improvements that you can undertake there. Um, Surprisingly, there's still 13% of the organizations that participated in our initial survey that still fail to measure training effectiveness at all. So they're not doing quizzes, I guess. Or their training system doesn't allow them to do that, or they're not paying attention to the results, or I don't know exactly what's going on there, but that's a little disturbing that we still have over 10% of organizations that aren't engaging and trying to determine effectiveness of their training. 46% of organizations, so less than half, conduct annual compliance risk assessments, and only 19% of organizations work with third parties. And obviously, we are a service provider, so we love for clients to come to us and ask us for help in these kind of endeavors. But I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with doing something internally. But how are you doing it? And are you leveraging data? Are you benchmarking? Where, how are you utilizing a data-driven method for your internal risk assessment or compliance review? I think that's a more important question. We still have about 50% of organizations that aren't doing this uh, on an annual basis, and you don't necessarily have to undertake a heavy lift every year, but you need to be just as your most organizations of size have an enterprise risk uh, process that is works on an annual basis. Maybe not a full ERM every year, but some portion, some review, some consideration of emerging risk. I think that is something to consider, and you need data. You need to be able to benchmark. You need to be able to uh, uh, pull the necessary data from your internal organization to be able to do that effectively. Uh, a majority of organizations, 65%, report less than 1% of a reporting rate of less than 1% of their employee count. Um, you have to be careful with making too many judgments about the number of reports that you're getting on your hotline helpline. If you're only getting a few, that may not indicate that there are two potentially wrong answers you could have to that data point. One is everything's great because we only have a few, or the other one on the other end of the spectrum is, oh my gosh, nobody's reporting the stuff that's going on. The answer is probably somewhere in the middle, but it is, again, goes to my point a few minutes ago. I have concern that we still have a majority of organizations that aren't getting all the reporting, both on misconduct and on concerns more broadly. I make a distinction between, clear misconduct reporting and employees raising concerns that might impact, uh, uh, you know, what the organization does around compliance issues. But I feel like this sort of data here tells me that we still have a lot of organizations, perhaps the majority of organizations, that aren't getting all the data that they need. Maybe they have worked out an arrangement with HR and they're getting aggregate data from HR now. That's great. But we know from many years of surveys that the preferred place for reporting is that local leader. So if there's not a funnel getting that data up from the field on incident reporting, then I think we have potentially an issue there. Uh, and then the last piece of data that came up was we compared our trend data on some questions to similar questions that were asked in a survey that the NYSE and SCCE undertook back in 2014, just to see, you know, kind of have a level check on the maturity of what organizations are doing around data. And unfortunately, at least in the realm of culture survey and employee engagement survey, we're seeing that the percentage of organizations that are asking key questions around organizational justice and pressure to commit misconduct and some of these other key culture questions, that percentage has gone down. So some concern when you look at some of these individual areas where organizations have been collecting data for years on culture, for example, where the percentage of organizations that are asking those key questions has declined. I don't know whether that's because back in 2014 we were just coming out of uh, s- uh, the financial crisis and all the legislation and regulatory focus that came after the financial crisis, and we were more heightened about gathering data and improving programs, and we've kind of slacked off in the last decade or so. Not entirely sure. We're going to have to keep gathering data to see if, if this is a bump that's gonna change. But overall, have some concerns about even that traditional data that we've been gathering for a long time, like on culture. So, third and last question from our PMA data set. Which of the following apply to your organization's method for tracking and reporting the management of cases? So, do you have an automated tracking system that logs case data? Do you have a system that's a little more sophisticated that can help you identify trends and help you analyze that data? Or are you still documenting cases manually? All right, let's see what our group today is doing around gathering misconduct and concerns. Oh, very evenly divided here. Almost 50% are have an automated system, although and almost 50% are still doing a manual process. So some opportunity there. Well-established tools in case management. Lots of variety, lots of different options there that organizations can take a look at. So we at least have 40% of our audience today that's one area you might want to investigate. So proportionality. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but again, as I mentioned at the top, I think it's important, not only because it dovetails with gathering data, but also it's going to help you because you're not going to be able to gather and analyze data unless you have the resources to do so. It's going to help you make the case that you need those resources. Um, so some key questions that the department asked prosecutors to ask is there sufficient funding to monitor, investigate, and remediate misconduct? Are there budget constraints that have put a hold or a stop on identified areas where a control or a tool or a process needed to be implemented and it was not? Um, again, the focus in uh, because this comes out of the fraud section, often goes towards third-party due diligence and comes out of the anti-corruption context. But I think that's still valid for organizations, even if anti-corruption is not a top, blinking red risk for your organization, to still consider third-party risk just generally. Uh, and is and this is the most important thing that came out of this memo that's different. Is the compliance budget growing in line with the expansion and growth of the business and the risk exposure that growth is going to necessitate? Um, Paper program, another cliche for those of you who've been in compliance for a long time that we've heard for years. I mean, the old story here is that Enron had an amazing code of conduct and a amazing set of procedures for their compliance program, but just wasn't implemented. So, uh, again, going back to what I talked about earlier, if you're just throwing, there's not a lot of this going on in compliance. I know from talking to a lot of compliance officers, but some compliance officers do have, or some compliance programs do have a lot of resources, and they throw a lot of resources without taking a risk-based approach. That's the minority for sure. But that is just equally as ineffective as not having resources brought to bear at all. Um, so what prosecutors are supposed to do now when they're evaluating effectiveness is look at the proportionality of the resources that are being provided for compliance. Um, what does this mean? Well, if you have a compliance program where, again, remember that second bullet from the slide or two before, where you've identified risks and they haven't been addressed, but you have, a marketing budget that's doubled or tripled or quadrupled in the last 4 years, those are factors that are probably not going to inure to an organization's benefit if their program's being examined. It's going to be deemed pretty unfavorably if the uh, prosecutor investigating the effectiveness of your program finds that the compliance program has perennially been uh, de-emphasized and budget has been denied while budget has been increasing for all the other functions of the organization. That's going to be hard to justify. This proportionality principle, again, is new. It's not something that the department really talked about much before, but now they're going to be looking at your budget. This is a place where benchmarking can be helpful. I will caution you on this, though. We do gather data on headcount, on FTE, and on budget for organizations. That's in the PMA data set that I mentioned. Uh, but if you look at that data, you need to make sure that you're looking at it in context with your organization, employee size, revenue, et cetera, looking in the band that's consistent with your organization, because some organizations obviously are going to be spending several $1 million on compliance, but they may be in a completely different, highly regulated space and also have 100,000 employees while you have 1,000. So you have to compare apples to apples there, but that's one way to get a sense of, are you where you need to be with proportionality? So two questions. One, is your budget rising consistent with other functions in your organization? And is your budget consistent with true peers? Those are things that can examine and perhaps will help you. Many of you that are out there that are always fighting for budget, and I know that's a key consideration. Some red flags about proportionality here: uh, insufficient headcount. You don't have regional or function specific resources, particularly in uh, in highly risky parts of your operation. Skipping program reviews or audits or risk assessments, or just not ever having them, not having a plan for them is a red flag. Manual tracking, we already talked about that. Oh, sorry. And generic or outdated training. So not gathering data on training beyond uh, completion rates, and not having training that is actually appealing to your workforce, and making sure that you have training that is appropriate, that is dynamic and gets updated on a regular basis. No culture assessment or infrequent culture assessment, or you get like one or two questions on the HR employee engagement survey, and that's about it. Versus investigating perception in your organization and tacking and making changes based on that data. Again, that's data. The perception that your employees have about the program, about leadership, about ethical decision making, about pressure to commit misconduct, organizational justice, that's data. And it's again, a surprising number of organizations still aren't collecting that data on a regular basis. And our survey shows that the percentage that are asking these important questions has declined since 2014. So real concern there. Again, not on anything that's super sophisticated, no AI-driven machine learning there, just not capturing that data. So what can you do? What are some practical considerations? Uh, oh, I noticed we have some Q&A here, and I apologize. I had the wrong window open. So I want to let me address that before we jump into practical considerations. Uh, there was a question about, do we expect that the current administration is going to update the memo? No indication. There's been no changes. There hasn't been an update to the website that talks about compliance programs at the DOJ since the last administration, so since last fall. So right now, just assume it's going to remain in effect and that prosecutors are going to continue to use it and utilize it when they're examining program effectiveness moving forward. But no expected change at this point. But be aware that it can be withdrawn at any time. Um, Another question. Are you saying that only 20%, 28% of companies actually capture concerns reported to management? So I think that was on the data point about it's about using that data, not necessarily collecting it. Is it being utilized? So no. And again, the other question that I have that I think is really important is, are you getting it all? Are you getting all the aggregate data? So the numbers to me are concerning about not that they're not gathering data, not that they're not reporting it to the board of directors, but what is the quality of that data? If it's just the data from your hotline and helpline, I don't think that's complete. Um, there's a question related to that. Do you have best practice on how to capture reports for managers? It can be as simple as training those managers and having a method, a simple method for them to uh, uh, escalate and know, give them a framework. Not everything needs to be escalated, right? There are a lot of things that they can handle in the field that aren't necessarily question or issues that you need to know about for trending purposes or necessarily misconduct because they get told a lot of stuff and you want them to handle what they can handle. But you have to figure out what what's the escalation process for the stuff that you want them to report. Is it going to come up to compliance? Is it going to go to HR? Is it going to is there going to be another method by which it gets funneled up the chain of command? So it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, where do we draw the line on what we want reported up the chain of command, and what's the method going to be, and training managers on that so that they know what they're supposed to do when somebody taps them on the shoulder or comes into their office or has a question or concern. Question on where can I find FTE and budget numbers? There are, other organizations. LRN does collect that information. There are other organizations that collect information. I'm not sure of a public source on that. I think SCCE in the past has published some numbers around compliance budgets, so you might be able to find that information with SCCE. If you can't find it publicly, please feel free to reach out to us, particularly if you're an LRN client, because we do provide data to our clients. How should compliance look with an organization of 100 employees? Good question. And I mentioned this already, but it's worth reiterating. The department does not expect one size fits all. It doesn't expect somebody with 100 employees to have a sophisticated AI tool or to be spending, tens and tens of thousands of dollars on training if you can gather everybody in a room and train them. The expectation is that you address the risks that you have with the resources you have, and that you're just being that you're taking the proper approach, so that you're not totally ignoring the risks and the compliance responsibilities that you have for 100 employees. You're properly training them, giving them the resources they need, making sure that they have the ability to report up the chain of command in a proper way, and that you're assessing their perspectives, their perceptions on a regular basis. But it means a lot less resources if you only have 100 employees for sure. But the department recognizes that one size does not fit all, and the expectations will vary depending on the sophistication and the complexity of the organization. Um, I'm going to spend a little bit of time. There's some other questions. I'm grateful that we have so many questions, but I want to spend a little bit more time talking about practical steps just for a couple minutes, and then I'll jump back with 5 minutes left to answer as many questions as I possibly can before our time runs out. But thanks so much for supplying the questions, guys. What are some practical things that organizations can do around gathering data for compliance? Um, Broadly speaking, some broad strategies here is, and I've already mentioned it a couple of times, doing some sort of assessment upfront, figuring out where you might be able to gather data under those rocks that already exist. I'm real practical about this stuff. You could spend a lot of money on tools. You can, spend a lot of money on hiring people. But I think first step is what's out there. What can I gather now? And I've given you a couple examples already around incident reporting and around culture survey data. What's something that's already out there or easily accessible, uh, uh, for me right now? Another one is gifts and entertainment. If your organization tracks gifts and entertainment, many organizations do. You have a expense reporting tool. Do you have access to that? Can get aggregate data out of the expense reporting tool to take a look at trends and see if there are any red flags there? So do a comprehensive first step out of the gate. What's out there that I can gather right now without asking for more budget and more headcount? What can our team do reasonably right now? I think is the first step to make sure you're doing everything you can. And then if you are bumping your head up against the problem of not having resources and headcount, then you have a much better case for resources. What are your KPIs here? And what are you looking for? Like, if you're going to benchmark your program, what are the areas that you want to benchmark? Do you want to benchmark your training? How you conduct your training? How comprehensive your training is? Do you want to benchmark? Even simple things like how often do you update your code of conduct compared to peers? Code of conduct is the hub of the wheel for resources for most organizations directed at their employees on compliance. And it really ought to be the corners. And this is a term that the department has used in other memoranda, like the FCPA guidance, cornerstone of your program when they talk about code of conduct. What kind of benchmarking can you do around your code of conduct? And is it up to snuff? And is it really as effective as it could be? So what are you going to measure? And that can be for some organizations, some really basic things. And for other organizations that are doing real-time monitoring of transactions, can be very sophisticated. So it just really depends. But what are your KPIs? Um, to the extent you can and it makes sense, invest in tools for that real-time monitoring. That's, next step. I think a lot of organizations, and we saw in some of the data from our little short quiz that we did, 3-question quiz we did today. I think a lot of organizations that are on the line today, you're not there yet. You need to gather what you can, what perhaps is available already, and then worry about those more sophisticated tools down the road. Training. Uh, it doesn't make any sense to invest time and effort in new processes and procedures and tools and technology if you don't have the people that can utilize it and effectively monitor and then implement the necessary changes to the program based on what you're seeing. So making sure that training and the skill sets that you need for compliance are there. And then as I said, I'm real practical about this. Be realistic. Have a plan that you can actually accomplish. That's going to be much more effective. Bite off what you can chew. And maybe year one is just getting HR to finally share their incident reporting data with you in the aggregate so that you can, have a better picture. It might be, those first steps to gathering data. Some trends that we're seeing right now in data analytics use is a shift from manual to real time. So having more organizations are using dashboards that dynamically update rather than every quarter or however they're reporting to the leadership and to the audit committee of the board of directors. Taking a snapshot of incident reporting and the other metrics you have, having something that's a little bit more dynamic if you have the budget and resources to do something like that. Predictive modeling, I mentioned that just in the last slide, using AI and machine learning. If you don't have the resources to hire people, maybe you do have the resources to get a tool that's going to look at all of those G&E reports and find those trends. That's another thing to consider, and that's a trend that we're seeing. Using the results from uh, evaluating your training and program assessment and review and risk assessment to make changes to your program. That dynamic component that we talked about at the beginning that is mentioned in the memoranda. The program needs to be dynamic. So if you're gathering all this data and you see trends, then you need to think about what that means for making changes, maybe changing a policy, maybe changing a process, maybe changing the G&E process, in some way because you're seeing too many violations. So making sure the program's dynamic. Uh, Cross-functional. Uh, Again, stature. Do you have, as the compliance officer, the role in the organization that you need to be able to effectuate effective compliance? So integrating with the rest of the business is really important. And I've already talked about automated compliance programs. Um, Having access to the data, that's often the first step, turning over those rocks. Is that data helpful? How does that inform the components of your program? How are you going to use it? Is it revelatory in some way? And if not, can you find data that will help you there? And then testing. Data is going to be helpful for testing and making sure you've made those changes. Now let's go back and see if we're still having all those violations in the Genie request system after we've made those changes, and changed the policy, changed the training, uh, changed the expectations on gifts and entertainment. Does that make a difference? So data can be used throughout the different parts of the process. I want to jump back to a couple of questions here, but this presentation is going to be available, and I have a couple more slides on here that give you some more specific use case for specific things, and I don't want to spend our little remaining time doing that. I'd rather answer the questions that you guys have. But there are lots of different ways you can approach integrating data into your compliance program. Uh, you know, we've talked about a lot of them, like culture measurement, policy and code monitoring, training monitoring, just finding ways to add more data behind evaluating all those components of your program will really be effective. So let me go back and try to answer a few more questions. Uh, what would a realistic roadmap look like for organizations just starting to embed analytics into their compliance framework? Well, I think I've mentioned a couple already. Again, turn over those rocks. What's available right now? Talk to HR, talk to the other functions in the organization, and find out where you can gather data now. Getting a really nice dashboard and a super cool tool, that's going to be helpful, but you need to have the data first, right? So find out what's available now. Find out what you can use now. And then you can adapt and figure out what's the best way to gather that data, analyze that data, and utilize it to improve the program. Um, and then how should compliance look with 3 or 4 employees? Well, that's even easier than 100 employees. You can, again, with smaller organizations, we're talking a lot about tools and systems and gathering a lot of data with more integrated, larger organizations. That doesn't really apply if you have a few employees, but you might have a lot of transactions, even if you only have 3 or 4 employees, depending on your business line. So you still might have a lot of activity that needs to be monitored. And maybe that's if you only have a few employees, that means you're probably a compliance office of one, and you probably do other stuff besides compliance. That might be a good use case for a tool. If you've got a lot of transactions, but don't have a lot of resources and don't have a lot of don't have any headcount, that might be an operation where perhaps you could find a tool that can take that data and look for trends and look for exceptions and flag that stuff for you. AI is really good at, if you can give it very direct and clear limitations to finding stuff like that. AI is super valuable, and we need to the extent we can, be utilizing these tools more and more in compliance. It really makes a difference. Well, we're here at the end. I'm sure you have more questions, and this has probably brought up more questions than answers. That's always the case. An hour is really not a lot of time to talk about a topic as deep and as complex as data use in compliance. but I sure appreciate your time today. If you do have follow-up questions, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead here. Uh, I want to let you know that here are some QR codes for both the memoranda from the Department of Justice, the PMA data that I was talking about today. We have a report that's in the middle there. That's the QR code to download that report. And then if you want to talk to us and ask us a question, we always are happy to entertain questions. And if you have questions for me that you didn't get to ask because of time, please feel free to reach out as well. But it's been my pleasure to talk a little bit about compliance and data with you all today. And it's a dynamic and changing area. But compliance officers and those responsible for compliance in organizations are used to doing the heavy lifting, and this is like no other issue that you have to confront. It just is going to take some time and dedication to figure out what you can do and how you can do it. But thanks very much and have a pleasant rest of your day.